Hello and welcome to another Adrenalin Shot, a short, sharp 5-minute burst of valuable and interesting information. And today my guest is Andrew Horobin. Now, Andrew is a professional speaker, facilitator, author, comedian and award-winning singer-songwriter. Over 22 years, he's worked with both big and small businesses across Australia and overseas. He's trained state, federal and international police, including undercover officers, surveillance operatives, informant handlers, intel analysts, and senior managers of serious crime, working with police from over 40 countries. Andrew is the author of 3 books, including Bullshift, How to Get More Honesty and Straight Talk at Work, which we're going to be talking about today. Andrew has also won state and national songwriting awards and wrote actually a sold-out musical, Andrew, called What's a Man Gotta Do? He's played 2 seasons of the Melbourne International Comedy Festival and in 2012 took his one-man show on a national tour of 45 towns across 5 states in Australia. Andrew began his business at age 18 with no qualifications, experience, equipment or capital. He's now 42 years old and travels around Australia and overseas from his base in Fremantle, Western Australia. And after that introduction, I'm absolutely sure you're dying to meet Andrew in person. So welcome, Andrew.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Now, I'm lucky enough to have a copy of Bullshift. And for those of you who've never seen this before, you can probably see what the play on words is about here. And I think I can do this because it's national consumption, but this book is about bullshit. There's too much of it. What's it costing you? And we need to stop. And so we're going to talk a bit about Bullshift today. It's about how do we shift the bull. Is that right, Andrew?
That's right, yeah. So how do we take those things that so many of us do on a day-to-day basis that make it hard for people to be open, honest and straight with each other, and how do we shift it?
Yeah. So what would you say is the reason that most people struggle with both giving and receiving feedback?
Our observation is that it's really to do with the human ego, which is a fragile thing. It's easily offended. It gets attached to things. Being a little bit attached to stuff is quite helpful. You want people to be able to take ownership of things, and there's a healthy sense of ownership. But what can happen is that people take an unhealthy kind of ownership. They become possessive. They over-identify with something, and then any feedback about that thing becomes personal. We take it personally. We become defensive, and that makes it very hard to give us feedback. It actually becomes quite unsafe to give us feedback when we're in that defensive, egoic state. So that makes it hard to receive it and to give it, because if I'm getting it, I'm taking it way too personally, and if I'm giving it, I don't know how the other person's going to react. So we try to help people to increase their self-awareness, to know why they're being so defensive, and change some of those reactions so that it's possible to just have an open conversation about the content of what's being said.
Yeah, it's my observation, Andrew, that a lot of people get really fearful about having these conversations as well. You know, they start almost imagining how it's going to turn out and turning themselves inside out, thinking about, you know, how this is going to be, and they get all anxious about it, which actually makes the conversation harder to have. What's your take on that?
Oh, that's exactly our experience as well, is that so often we're playing the whole thing out in our heads. In fact, we have one of the questions we ask in the workshop is, do you have conversations in your head that you should really be having in person? And in the Bullshift company, we have a rule that if you've had the conversation for 2 days in a row in your head, on the 3rd day, you've got to have it in person.
Right.
Because we think a bit of mental rehearsal is helpful. So sometimes it's good to play a thing through in your mind and think, well, how might the person react and what's a good way to say this? And sometimes once you've had the conversation in your head, you realize it's not something you need to talk to the other person about. It's something you need to sort out for yourself. So a bit of mental rehearsal is good, but if you go from rehearsing and reflecting to stewing, that's really unhealthy. And we reckon it's time to have the conversation out there. Instead of making a bunch of assumptions about what the person's going to do, give them a chance to respond for themselves. And, we reckon we drive ourselves nuts doing stuff up here instead of just working it out with other people.
Oh, I totally agree with you. You know, and the more you do it in your head, the more tangled it seems to get anyway. And the more I think you over exaggerate what the reaction is going to be. And, you know, sometimes you go into that conversation and it's like, oh, wow, that actually went way better than I thought it was going to. I thought they were going to do this, or I thought they were going to do that.
Yeah, we think that people avoid an enormous amount of stuff on a bunch of assumptions about what other people might do instead of just finding out.
Yeah.
So we try to help people to develop the skills and understand some principles about how to do that. Sometimes they have very good reasons. Sometimes they have previous experiences. So the last time I raised an issue with this person, they got so defensive, so I never want to talk to them again. In some workplaces, you've got a person who's managed to condition and coach everybody to leave them alone so they don't take any at all. And when
Yeah.
you join the organization, they say, for God's sake, don't talk to Jeff, right? Because one time in one meeting, but we reckon most of the time with the right attitude and some self-awareness and a few skills, it's possible to get into conversations people thought previously where they couldn't do.
Yeah. And you spoke just then about you teach principles, and I noticed that you tend to teach principles rather than processes. Tell me about that.
Well, one of the things we've learned from doing this, because we teach people or encourage people to be open to feedback, and our practice of that is all the time that we're teaching, people are giving us feedback about what does and doesn't work. And one of the things that people have said over many years is when there are feedback processes that feel prescribed or feel like it's a step, there are several dangers. One is that the other person feels like they're being processed. So they feel like something's being done to them, and we're trying to get people from that parent to child dynamic instead into an adult to adult conversation, which means the other person responds for themselves. And the other thing is it makes too many assumptions about what the other person's supposed to do. So it's like I've got a script, but you have to improvise, but everything you improvise has to match the script that I've got. And so it can be too controlling, it can be too presumptuous. So we do encourage people to prepare, because we think if you've got to have a difficult conversation, it can be really helpful to prepare for it. But part of the preparation is getting yourself into a state of curiosity and respect for the other person. So you don't know what's going to happen, rather than going, I'm going to follow this process and the other person had better stick to the same process. So the principles you can use in any order. Your principles you use whenever you need them. They don't have to go in a particular way.
Yeah. So what about giving us an example of one or two of these principles?
Okay. So, well, the foundational one really, they're all based on the idea of don't react, do respond. So try to overcome what is, for most of us, our automatic reactions and instead replace them with conscious responses. So they're all don'ts replaced by do's. And the first don't is don't be defensive. We encourage people to notice what their defensive reactions are, try to catch them as they arise, park them for the moment, and instead to be curious. So don't be defensive, be curious. Just when you notice that defensiveness, ask a bunch of questions, focus on the content of what's being said and trying to understand, trying to listen and hear things before you judge them, rather than be judging them as soon as they're coming out. Yeah,
because you're right. It's so easy for people to take these things personally and then start playing their little scripts that they have or their stories around what that is. And I know I try to help people with a similar sort of process. I mean, my way of dealing with things like that is if someone's behaving in a way that might press my buttons, which is what I might call, I suppose being defensive, I try to say to myself in my head, that's a kind of interesting reaction I'm getting from this person. I wonder where that's coming from.
Yeah. Well, it's great. So that curiosity is exactly what we're encouraging people to do, because we say, some people say, oh, that person really pushes my buttons. But whose buttons are they? They're my buttons. And I resent you for pushing them, but they're my buttons.
That's right.
How about I spend some time being curious about why is this bothering me? And why doesn't it affect me and no one else? How come I'm having this reaction, but other people aren't having the same reaction? So the curiosity is external. It's me making sure that I'm listening to you and making it safe for you to say things and focusing on the content. And it's internal, asking myself, why am I having such a reaction? When I get really defensive, I make it all about myself. And I'm supposed to be at work for something that's greater than me, to contribute to something that's bigger than me. So we try to get people out of themselves a little bit, out of their ego a little bit, focus on the content. And if with lots of practice, you become more robust and more resilient, you can actually take a lot more feedback, not take it so personally.
Absolutely. And I told you 5 minutes would go fast. And I actually forgot to put the clock on when we started. So you got even more than your normal 5 minutes there, Andrew.
Okay.
And I've absolutely loved talking to you. And I know that the people that, watch my Adrenalin Shot will enjoy all of that as well. Maybe we'll have you back on the show another time, because I know there's 13 more principles, aren't there? We only touched on one. So maybe we can cram in another couple another time. That would be great.
Thank you very much. That'd be wonderful.
Thank you.